Welcome into episode 323 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Brew and Scott McLaughlin. Today is a special mailbag episode, so thanks to everybody for submitting your questions. We're going to get to hopefully all of them. Bridget and Scott, how's the offseason going for you guys so far? I know it's not the offseason for all professional Boston hockey teams, but at least for the Bruins it is.
Yeah, today we're both going to be heading out to Game 5 of PWHL Boston against Minnesota. So Scott and I will both be there. It's going to be the last game of the season. They go to 7 games. They don't go to 7 games. They go to 5 games. So, not quite the off season yet for hockey for me. And I know Scott's going to cover this one as well. So that's exciting. And tickets were up over $3,000. Some of them on the resale market, and it's kind of crazy. So, hey, maybe Boston hockey will have a championship this year. It's just not the Bruins.
Yeah, and wasn't BC or BU. So
nope.
Yeah, the women gotta get it done. I've also been covering the Celtics, who are now they're in their own off season before the finals start. I think those start in August sometime. Long layoff before the finals, but I'll be there for those games as well. So yeah, still enough to keep me busy, which is good.
I don't know what the hell we're gonna do when there's no basketball or PWHL though.
But by the time Celtics ends, because they space out the finals so much, it'll just about be draft and free agency. So
true.
Ties to get the Bruins announced their key offseason dates on Tuesday, that was. And development camp is July 1st through 4th over at Warrior. So it starts the same day as the first day of free agency. So, there's some stuff to do. And then after that, then it really quiets down, July and August.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's still stuff going on now. We still got 2 good series in the conference finals. 3 straight overtime games between the Panthers and Rangers. That's been fun. Yeah.
And of course, we have a baseball team still in town, and then I'm sure there'll be Patriots summer storylines going that'll keep us invested in the Boston sports landscape in general. Bridget and Scott, before we get into the mailbag questions, there was a little bit of news regarding the Bruins as David Pastrnak and Pavel Zacha win gold over at World Championships in Czech Republic. What are your thoughts on that? Clearly, that means a lot to the Czech players themselves, and I know David Pastrnak wants to be invited to the Four Nations tournament next year.
Yeah, you made that pretty
September,
clear.
I think. Is it September or is it January?
Yeah.
When's that tournament again?
I think it's mid-season.
It's instead of the All-Star game, right?
Yes, that'd be January. But he made that very clear. He put it out there in a post on social media that he said no invite, because it's the only 2 European countries are going to be Finland and Sweden, and then it's just US and Canada, which we had already said, why can't it just be you segment Europe into Eastern and Western or something, to let some of the guys that are really good players from countries that are not Sweden and Finland play. And clearly Pastrnak just loves hockey that much that he always wants to be playing, even instead of maybe even taking a break during the that break there for the Four Nations. But I don't know if I've ever seen Pasta that happy, to be honest with you. He was up when they won. He was up on the this bus that they had or whatever, standing with the cup. Someone broke it. They didn't say who. There was someone that had the cup a lot that was having a lot of fun with it. That wears a Bruins jersey normally, but
drinking a lot of beer out of it.
Drinking so much beer out of it.
Flinging beer out of it into the crowd.
I know. He's a man of the people. I think that this week he had probably more beer than he's had in a long time, but he looked like he was having a lot of fun. It was nice to see him just being full Pastrnak, just going nuts. But the whole time I'm thinking, okay, well, him and Zaka, they got to be over there kind of, talking to Martin Necas like, hey, hey, we had so much fun here winning gold. Maybe we could, use you back in Boston. Maybe there was a little politicking going on. I know, Brian, you said that Pastrnak was also on a podcast after the gold medal game and was saying, that wasn't really what he was doing. But I think everybody, they all talk to each other about what they're going to be doing during the NHL season.
Yeah. Elliot Friedman actually was on NHL Network and linked the Vancouver Canucks to being one of the teams interested in Martin Necas. So if the Bruins are interested, they're not going to be alone. And yeah, so I mean, you bring up the podcast. So David Pastrnak was on Spit and Chicklets after he won over in Czech Republic, and a lot of the conversation was about that tournament. But there was also Bruins talk, and that's what we kind of care about most on here. And yeah, he was asked if he was going to do any off-season recruiting, and he talked about how being an original six team and the sports city that Boston is, that should be enough for anybody to want to come and play in Boston. So that's more or less his political answer. I'm sure he's having more conversations about that. And he talked about also how the Panthers were just so much deeper than the Bruins and so much of a better team than Boston. And we were talking about it before the podcast. We don't know if the Panthers had more elite talent in their top six, which is where David Pastrnak plays. I don't know if saying that Florida was so much deeper is accurate, even though that's coming from somebody who was in the series. I think it's more that Florida was, well, they were deeper, but they were deeper at the high-end skill positions. And so you read between the lines, and I just think that David Pastrnak clearly is yearning for a true top centerman to play alongside going forward. In his time in Boston, said it's going to be an interesting summer for GM Don Sweeney. He didn't mention Sweeney's name, but that's what he meant. And I think that's kind of a good segue into a lot of the questions that were asked in this week's mailbag, which is what is the future of the Bruins center ice position, and where and how are they gonna fill in these holes that they clearly had on the roster last year.
Yeah, so I'll start with an email that has
but sorry, Bridget, but before we get going, I was just one last thing on Pastrnak, just so we don't gloss over this, but he scored the winning goal in the gold medal game and had really a national hero moment for the Czech Republic.
Yes.
Which obviously he's already a legend over there, but that really just cements it further. And for people who maybe weren't following or aren't really familiar with the World Championships, because it's not a very important tournament over here. It takes place same time as the Stanley Cup playoffs, so obviously you're not getting all the best American and Canadian players. But over in Europe, it does mean something, and it has for a long time. This is a tournament that's existed for over 100 years. And for Czech Republic to win on home ice in Prague was a huge deal. And so for Pastrnak to score that goal, I'm going to guess if you asked him, he would tell you that he scored the two biggest goals of his life within the last month. Game 7 against Toronto and that goal in the gold medal game. So obviously not directly related to the Bruins, but just a huge moment for Pastrnak. And, hopefully it's something that gives him something to feel good about. The one other piece of news that came out of all this was he gave an interview with a Czech paper. And you got to always be a little cautious of these translations and kind of what gets through. But he said he was dealing with a hip injury. And the translation said he was told he needed surgery, but then the Czech doctor said he didn't. I'm just a little skeptical of the overall translation, but I guess it's going to be something to monitor. I don't know. It sounded like he doesn't think he needs surgery. Don Sweeney said in his end of year press conference that no one was scheduled. to have surgery, but remember, Pastrnak did say on breakup day that he was dealing with a groin thing all year on and off, and groin pain can be a symptom of a hip issue. So there's something there, but I don't think we have 100% clarity just yet.
Yeah, and I was going to say that the Pastrnak goal, the game-winning goal, it starts with a face-off win by Pavel Zacha, and those two were out there most shifts together.
Actually, I think it was David Spacek who scored that goal, right?
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, Brian, but that was a rough one. That was, I mean, like you said, it might be Pasta's like one of his more memorable, like and special to himself goals, and the call was not that David Pastrnak scored. So I'm gonna reserve my comments on that.
Well,
but
fortunately for Pasta, I bet the Czech call got it right. So
the Czech call, yeah, okay, so he can just keep that, save that. Anyway, let's get to some of our mailbag questions. So we're gonna start with Jimmy, who sent this to us in an email. He said he's a Bruins fan from Sweden, and he had a lot of questions about different options the Bruins could add this offseason. So he said, I love the skate pod. Only second to his favorite team, the Bruins. So thank you for that. And he said, in preparation for the offseason and the hunt for a center, I think this must be a Swedish term. I vacuumed the league for alternatives. Maybe that's a Swedish term that we just don't use.
It's like kind of like sweep around like covered ground.
I actually might start using that. I contextually exactly know what he means. Are we Swedish?
I technically yes, but I mean I don't speak any Swedish. Scott
and I if you're looking at us on YouTube, Scott and I look nothing like a Swedish person, but Bridget very clearly does. You get the blonde hair going. Yeah. Blonde hair, blue eyes. That's the staple of Swedes, right?
Yeah, I'm also. I was gonna say I'm not tall enough to be Swedish, so I
also can cook some Swedish food, so I think that makes me, officially at least somewhat. But and for Jimmy, Swedish brownies are great, and I know how to make those. So anyway, he said he vacuumed the league for alternatives and asked for our opinion on them. He said, I do not see Necas as a center, which I am also very skeptical of him as a center. We can go through why that is. But if they lose Jake DeBrusk, like you still need another top six winger probably. He says if he would have taken over Kotkaniemi's spot long ago. And then he says of the 8 alternatives that he went through and saw, just 3 of them were unrestricted free agents. Lindholm, Duchesne, and Stevenson were the ones that he pinpointed. And then before we get to the rest of his questions, just initial thoughts on those 3 UFAs.
Yeah, so we've talked about Elias Lindholm quite a bit, and obviously the Bruins have been linked to him in the past. I like Elias Lindholm for the right price. I'm not going crazy because I don't think he's a stone cold lock, bona fide number 1 center. I think he was great when he had Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk as his line mates. I think having David Pastrnak as a line mate would help. Plays a 200-foot game. He had a good postseason for Vancouver this year. So I like him, but there's a limit to that like, and I'm going to say that limit is roughly $7.5 million a year, or maybe a little more than that. I definitely don't think I'd go over 8. Chandler Stevenson, good player who intrigues me. I don't think he's a number 1 center. But at the right price, I think he makes your team better. Like he can be a second or third line center. He can play wing. He's fast. We've talked about Cam Neely said they need more speed. Like Stevenson would help with that. So intriguing player. I don't think really a number 1 center option. Matt Duchesne, interesting. Like clearly still has some gas in the tank. He's had a good season in Dallas, and again, I don't know if he's a number one center at this point, but I do think he's a player that can still make a contending team better. He, still plays, still creates a lot of offense, still has some speed in his game. So he intrigues me, but again, it's got to be at the right price, and it can't be too long of a commitment. He's 36 or 37. So,
Duchesne?
Yeah.
No, I don't think he's that old.
Sorry, 30. Yeah, 33, I guess. Yeah.
If he's 37, that makes me pretty old as well. So, no, he's 33. Don't rush our age.
It's 37 in dog years, Scott. That's what you're thinking of.
Well, you might have to sign him until he's 37 then.
Yeah, like I could see that. I could see, him being wrapped up with your team till he's 37 or something like that. I mean, he had an incredible season with the Predators a few years ago when he had 43 goals, 43 assists, but like it's for me, what's hard with him is I just don't know the fit necessarily. And I mean, there's no denying that he's been a good player. There's been there's some criticism about like maybe I don't want to say work ethic, but like there's just been things that have come out about him that I'm not 100% sold on him as your solution for the number one center or even a number two center job. And some of it has to do with age. Some of it has to do with other things that you hear. And I know that every organization has a list of guys that they just might not necessarily see as a fit with a team. And he's interesting because I think there's a good case to be made for him, the kind of production he has. But there are other drawbacks, I think, in the move if you're trying to sign Duchesne. No, nobody. Scott, you're clearly Googling something. I think Brian's frozen. So,
yeah, no, I mean, I think you're. Yeah, it is interesting. Like, I still don't know why Nashville bought Duchesne out. Like, maybe there was some, I don't know, off-ice locker room stuff. Like, I have no idea because he's still playing at a pretty high level and was more or less worth his contract. And then he, production-wise, he's been a steal for Dallas. So, yeah, you're right. Like, it seems like there's something weird there that Nashville would have wanted to move on from him, but I don't know. I haven't heard anything negative about him in Dallas. Certainly seems to be a fit there, and had a good season and is a big part of the reason that they had as good of a year as they did and are still going in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely worth talking about, worth being on the list. I think that there are maybe other guys that I put higher in terms of like a potential and fit wise, and especially because we're finally a year past the Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci retirement, and I assume that you're trying to find a longer term fix. Like you're trying to find a guy who you believe in for a little bit longer, unless you're being patient and we had some emails and some questions about, and even Scott brought this up or someone brought this up, like, why don't you wait till Draisaitl becomes a free agent, which I don't think he's ever going to become a free agent. I think probably someone trades for him or he signs an extension before that. But anyway, do you want to move on to a few of the other names in the list? So Lindholm, we did talk about already. Stevenson, I just don't know if he's all that high up in terms of like, is he a legit top 6 guy? And he just might not be a big enough upgrade for what the Bruins are looking for.
Yeah, I mean, none of the names, quite frankly, that we've talked about so far, I think are our number one center solutions. I do think Lindholm, I'm trepidatious on. I just think that to simply put it, I feel like his better days may be behind him. And I don't have a ton of interest in signing him to be their number one center and locking him up for a term that is uncomfortable for the Bruins. The number Scott put out earlier, which I think was like 7.5, like I would do that. It would depend on how long, but I don't know. I'm not really high on Lindholm going forward. And, Duchesne, he would be like he is in Dallas. He would be a good role player in a middle six for a championship team. He's not a number one center. Stevenson, we've talked about. I think he has potentially maybe 2 center potential, but not 1. And, Necas is the name to me that he's younger. I think he's 25 years old.
Yep.
He has all the skill and talent in the world. Amazing skater. He's 6'2", 190. So he's got size that you want at that position and the skill. I think clearly maybe he wasn't a center in Carolina because there's probably some things to be desired on the defensive side of the puck, which clearly he would need to work on. But he's still young, and we've seen it with certain players.
Putting him with Pasta, like if you're putting him on a line with Zaka and Pasta, like probably needs somebody that's a good 200-foot player for a center.
Yes,
and
you have to be defensively responsible.
Yes, and when we saw Pavel Zacha transform back from a winger to a center, however, I think Pavel Zacha was he was still getting some looks in New Jersey at center, just not for extended periods of time. And when he first came to Boston, he started out as a winger too. So I do think that. Go ahead, Scott.
The one thing I would say on Necas that could maybe give you some hope that he, that there's at least upside for him to be better defensively or a better fit as a center is Carolina plays a different system. They play man-to-man defense. Bruins play zone. So, do your pro scouts identify anything in Necas that would say, oh, he could be a better fit in a zone scheme, which, would require him to cover more ground, which means he has to be committed. Like right off the bat, you have to have the work ethic, but maybe his skating helps him more there. Like if we're talking about, the challenge of covering so much ground in the Bruins system, well, a good skater should have a bit of a leg up on that. But again, it's all going to come down to, is he committed to it? Like, does he want to get better as a defensive player? Because in Carolina, he's played 5 full NHL seasons. And at least, if you look at the analytics and, the advanced metrics, there really hasn't been any noticeable improvement in how he grades out defensively. So you would think that, working under Rod Brendamore, who was a Selke winner himself as a player and obviously has implemented a very good defensive system down there, you would like to have seen, some improvement at some point that would suggest that he's not just an offense only and, transition player, which has value. Don't get me wrong. The positives with Necas far outweigh the negatives. But if you're talking about transitioning to center, the defense has to be there.
Yeah, and since we brought this up last, we were talking about okay, because this is somebody who's a restricted free agent, right? This is someone that you have to acquire in a trade. So has rights in a trade. And just the reason that it came up in the first place was that there was rumors that he just might not want to be there anymore. And since we talked about that last, the GM for Carolina resigned, Don Waddell. So I don't know if that changes anything, but obviously your general manager has a huge say in what moves are going to happen this offseason. So just kind of interesting to bring that up, I think.
Yeah, by the way, their new GM, Eric Tulsky, former advanced stats blogger writer type who's worked his way up. So win for the nerds.
Yeah, Scott, is that your end goal in 15 years? You're gonna work your way up?
Yeah, well, I think I could be the Bruins general manager right now if they wanted to hire me.
That's true. I think I've heard you say that before.
I keep applying for it, and they keep telling me no, go away.
They keep telling you the job's not open.
I mean,
so
I will say this though, guys, just quickly, if they do make a move for Necas and he just doesn't, let's just say he doesn't pan out as a centerman, still not a bad, top winger to have for your future. I mean, alongside Pastrnak, like I think sometimes you're just not a fit somewhere. Yes, your coach could be a former Selke winner and Stanley Cup champion and have a huge emphasis on details and work ethic. But look, sometimes when you're behind a star pupil in Sebastian Aho, who clearly is, the favorite there and their rightful number one center to this point in his career, I just think sometimes a change of scenery with somebody who has size and all the skill and talent in the world, I think, you can't teach talent, but you can teach defensive awareness, and it could be a work in progress, but I think it could be ultimately a big time acquisition for the Bruins. I mean, alternatively, the other side of the spectrums Jimmy mentions is a cheaper option like Phil Deneau in LA, who is all defense, no offense, right? So you're never going to have the perfect player, I guess is my point. I just think right now the Bruins, sometimes you can't be, you have to be beggars, you can't be choosers with the situation that they're in. And so I think he's of the names that we've talked about, he's the one who interests me the most at this stage. Of course, I don't know a potential hockey trade that's out there, right? Like we're kind of talking about
Scott wrote about one.
UFAs and what's that?
So Scott wrote about one.
Scott did. He did. So we could do that.
Well, but that was involving Necas, and it was potentially Linus Ullmark going to Carolina because the Hurricanes once again were let down by their goaltending in the playoffs. Freddie Anderson and Pyotr Kochetkov had both had some good stretches in the regular season, but didn't hold up in the postseason. So there's been rumors that Elliot Friedman in that same podcast said that he believed that Carolina was one of the teams the Bruins had talked to about Ullmark at the trade deadline. So you would have to think with the way the playoffs went, Carolina might be one of the teams that circles back on that. Obviously, we don't know if they're on or off his no trade list or if he would go there or whatever. But, you can certainly see like how the framework of a deal like that works out. Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic also wrote about a possible Necas trade and said Carolina's not really interested in futures, like draft picks, prospects, and unless they can turn around and go get another star. But they want, they're in win now mode. Like they're not rebuilding. So in that sense, like you could see why Ullmark would be appealing.
And again, like there could be a hockey trade out there with a team that has a number one center that we just have no idea. As Bridget, as you mentioned last episode, somebody could just be unhappy. Like there could be something we just don't know about. Like this would have never happened. But for example, what if Tage Thompson was just on his way out in Buffalo? Like who you just never know. We don't. So we're kind of keeping it strictly to the names that are on, the UFA market or restricted free agent market. And a name that we haven't mentioned really at all, I think it's probably because we just don't see him leaving Tampa Bay, is Steven Stamkos. I mean, he is an option, right? He's a free agent, but I just don't see him leaving Tampa. Maybe that's why we just haven't really gone there very often, but we don't mean to ignore his availability. Just,
Yeah. And but not for nothing, but like they had a chance to extend him and they haven't. The same thing we were talking about with Jake DeBrusk last episode. It's like there was a window there that seemed like it would have made sense to sign an extension, and it didn't happen. And he's been allowed to go to free agency, which I think makes him uncomfortable and makes, and he could tell there's a bit of questioning, like, okay, how did we get to this point? So maybe it isn't as easy as like, okay, he's definitely going back to Tampa, because I think there's doubt there. I think there's a real chance he ends up not in Tampa. It just seems like something's off about, I don't know what changed about their negotiations or what the organization was waiting for, or they're going to see something from him. Or maybe they just think to themselves, we had a good run, but he's kind of on the other side of his career, and we looking to change things up. So I do think he's a legitimate option. It's hard to imagine him anywhere besides Tampa, just because that's where we have always seen him. But I think that you personally, like, as long as it makes it to free agency before he signs anywhere, you can negotiate with him, you can talk to him, you can give him an offer. So yeah.
And just to clarify, because sometimes people tend to take things literally, the Buffalo Sabres are not trading Tage Thompson. I was just illustrating. We just don't know what's out there outside of free agency.
Yeah.
Like there could be
Hey,
things
I'll
we have
take
no
Tage
idea
Thompson.
about. Oh yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
some people, in Buffalo have wanted out before. It's
Well,
Right?
I want in the
Scott,
sake of in the sake of moving things along, I want to mention someone who Jimmy brought up also in this email, who's very interesting to me, and that's Nazem Kadri, who just had a very good season in Calgary on a team that's clearly rebuilding. They traded away like half their team at the deadline. Kadri put up top 70 points and did it on a line with two young players in Connor Zary and Martin Pospisil, who are nice young players, but like obviously he wasn't playing with stars, and he still went over 70 points. Jimmy mentioned the possibility of like salary retention by Calgary, which I think could be in play. So, I remember we talked about Kadri a couple years ago when he was a free agent, and it was like probably the same debate you're gonna have now, which is like, is he really number one center? Is he more of a two on a really good team? But he'd be better than any center you have on your roster right now. So he's a year out from, or no, I think he has a couple years left on his deal, right? But he's made comments in the past about like, he didn't really sign up for a rebuild, or there's been rumors, reports that he's not kind of fully on board with the idea of a long rebuild. So he's in his 30s. You would think he wants to be in more of a win now situation. So that's definitely intriguing to me. Obviously, when he was in Toronto, he was a villain around here. But to me, no doubt he's a good player. Like I think he's plays a 200-foot game. Obviously has some edge.
God. Wait, did you say he has 1 year left on his contract?
No, I think he has a few.
Yeah, he signed a 7-year contract in 2022 with Calgary.
Yeah,
still got plenty of term left.
Cap friendly is freezing on me, so I wasn't able to pull it up.
We've got plenty of term left of that contract, which, by the way, he's 33. So that would take him to his late 30s, whoever picked up that contract. But you're, like you said, maybe some retention on Calgary's part could be there. But that's a long contract to pick up, because he was one of the top free agents at that point in the summer of 22. And people were wondering if someone would overpay for him, and he's got a pretty big contract, but not so big that you can't do it, but
he's a good player, and I like what he has to offer. Everything Scott kind of mentioned. Here's my concern with a lot of these names, and I appreciate Jimmy's question, because they're, quite frankly, like they're the names that are we know to be available to an extent, and for a position of need that the Bruins need to fill. None of them just really, none of them really are truly what they're in need of, though, right? Like they could play 1C. Charlie Coyle played 1C last year. Like, but it's not what these players aren't what they truly need. I think Necas could be if he were to become a two-way guy, but we don't know that. What concerns me, guys, is that the Bruins are looking for stopgaps during the prime years of McAvoy and Pastrnak, and I feel like it's partly because their hands are tied. But if they can find a way to be methodical and potentially acquire somebody that has youth and potential, I'd rather take that gamble than somebody who might be more established, but they're kind of on hole 16 and 15 of 18. And I'm concerned that they're going to lock somebody into a term and value that, I don't know. I guess you could always try to move somebody, but do you understand what I'm trying to say? I don't know if stopgap one center hockey during these valuable years of Pastrnak and McAvoy in particular is what they want to do. Not sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's tough because you want to be the best team you can be and competitive, but
yeah, I mean, if you're only trying to grab someone that you want to like give a test drive to for 2 or 3 years, like you're probably going to have to trade for that person. Free agents that we've mentioned are going to want more than that. Maybe you could get one of the older guys like Stamkos for 2 or 3 years, but and I don't see that.
What do you guys think of Trevor Zegras?
Well, I have my reservations similar to Matt Duchene about Trevor Zegras. So that's a hard one.
Same. I don't. Obviously, he's talented. He's already had a couple 60-point seasons. But yeah, there's going to be questions there. But the reality is like true number one center is just, Jack Eichel doesn't shake loose very often. That's like a kind of a once a decade
but he did
move.
From Buffalo.
Yeah, one guy in maybe like the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's.
I don't know. If you can find that guy, great. But they're not usually out there.
What I was gonna say was before you mentioned Zegras was, if you can get someone for that you think are they're not over the hill and they can be reliable for another 2 or 3 years, like a Steven Stamkos, and Matt Poitras, it continues to develop the way that he was earlier in the season before he got hurt. Maybe you see a path where you don't necessarily have to fill somebody in your roster that you signed for 6 years. Maybe you find someone like Stamkos that's good and valuable for the next 2 years. Matt Poitras starts to work in, get more. You start to find out whether or not he can be at some point a number 1 and 2 center in your lineup. So,
and the whole stopgap statement I made, it's not a blanket statement. Like if to your point, if Steven Stamkos is that guy, I mean, you have a championship window right there. But if that guy is Elias Lindholm or, Chandler Stevenson or whatever, whoever we've been talking about, it's different. Kadri, right? Like Stamkos gives you an immediate championship window with the current core the Bruins have. The other guys don't. So that I would be okay with because you're not wasting those prime years of McAvoy and Pastrnak. But so it just depends. But so aside from Stamkos, I mean, yes, that would be something, but who knows?
I mean, I still think you have a championship window with something less than like a true star number one center. I mean, you made the final 8 with really nothing more than like a decent number or solid number 2 center. So if you get, even like a Kadri who's like either an excellent number 2 or a solid number 1, and then, another scoring wing to go along with it, like, are you going to be a Stanley Cup favorite? Like, no, you're not going to be the favorite going into the year, but you've gotten better from a team that already, went to 6 games with Florida in the second round of the playoffs. Like you're getting closer. You're giving yourself a chance. So
yeah,
I still see value in that type of move, even if it's not, hey, we just landed our superstar center that we've been looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Since you brought up Zegras, I just say this facetiously. Cutter Gauthier probably be available a little bit shortly. We just got traded over there, but I don't know how. Like, it's a joke, but yeah, he's probably coming in and taking over for Zegras or
yeah. I was gonna say I don't know if there's enough room for Zegras and Gauthier.
I don't think so. All right, we spent a lot of time on Jimmy's questions, so that's gonna. But a good thing is a lot of people were also curious about the same thing. So, though we didn't get to everything Jimmy said, he also sent quite a bit. So we are going to go down to, I guess I'll go to Kim. So Kim emailed us. And this has to do with Matt Poitras, who I brought up briefly a little bit ago. She says, I'm so confused. Back in February, when Monty met with the media after Poitras' surgery, he made it clear that the reason to do the surgery in February was so that Poitras would have a full summer to get prepared to work on getting stronger, stamina, in which we did see. We thought he was, maybe need to put on a little bit more muscle. And they were starting to rest him where, a normal full-time NHLer would not be getting rested in certain situations. So basically she's saying that's the strategy that they said they were going to go with, get surgery early, give him time this offseason to get back into the swing of things and be ready to go. So she says, if they waited for the surgery until October and then Poitras would have to play catch up, or if they were to get the surgery until after the season, he wouldn't get back till October. So that'd be like right at the start of the season, he'd have to play catch up. And she's asking why now are 50% of Bruins media and podcasters saying that Poitras should start the year in Providence or spend the entire season in Providence so that his shoulder can heal. So guys, the reason that this comes from was probably the comments made during the managers and ownership press conference after the season ended, because we talked about this in our episode to cover that they were basically saying Poitras needs to re-earn his job, and I think that's how you end up bringing yourself down that road. Like, does he start in Providence? But I in my mind, I read it as less of a, hey, he has to start in Providence kind of thing, and more of a, he just the same as everybody else needs to earn his spot the way he did at a camp last year.
Yeah, everyone has to win a job. So, I didn't take that as some sort of shot that like Poitras wasn't going to be ready to do that or anything. And, I don't know like exactly who Kim's referring to. I guess maybe I'm not listening to enough podcasts from fellow Bruins
not know
colleagues or anything, but I haven't really heard that. No, I think where that comes from is like, obviously this past year, sending Poitras to Providence wasn't an option. He either had to be in Boston or go back to juniors. Because he'll now be 20 years old, he can go to Providence next year. That doesn't mean he will. But it's an option. Like, if he's not, if he doesn't win a job out of camp, or if you get into the season and it turns out, hey, maybe he needs a little bit more development time, like, that's on the table now. It's just, to me, it's just worth keeping in mind, because, again, he is only 20 years old. He's only played half an NHL season. So, it's possible he's going to need more development time, but I think he's going to have a really good shot at winning a job out of camp and sticking, because we also saw a lot of promise from him last year. And his shoulder should be fully healed by the time training camp comes around. We already saw him on the ice towards the end of the season, not doing like any heavy lifting or taking contact or anything, but he was at least back on the ice. He was stick handling, he was shooting pucks. So it seems like he's on target, and I don't think it's going to really derail his offseason at all. He should be able to have mostly a pretty normal offseason. I believe he's sticking around Boston, so that'll be good for him as well. So,
someone else had a question about where do they work out? Where do they skate in the offseason? Do they skate at Warrior? Was the question.
So some of it's at Warrior. A lot of them go down to Foxborough.
Yep.
And skate there. That'll be Bruins and also just other NHLers who come back to the area for the summer.
Like Charlie Coyle used to come here even when he was playing with Minnesota.
Yeah, so did Pavel Zacha, because he followed Jimmy Hayes, rest in peace. He followed him up here when they were teammates in New Jersey. He came up to Boston for a summer and skated there.
Yeah, and he already had a house here before he even got traded here. So yeah, in the offseason, and Swayman's staying as well. He said he plans on staying around here as well. to work with his goalie coach that he has, like his trainers that he has, that, you know, he's ready to go back to work. But yeah, with Poitras, I don't know, Brian, if you had any thoughts on him starting where he would start.
Yeah, I kind of echo what Scott said. I don't I mean, well, when you say everybody has a spot to earn, I mean, that's a little bit not true, not everybody, but I get what you're saying, Scott. Like, he of the people who have to earn a spot, he's one of them.
Yeah,
I guess I would just say
him and Beecher again will have to prove, you know, and re-win that spot. And it's also the comments I also took is like, just a little extra motivation. Like, you're not, you know, you don't get it automatically. Like, create some internal competition.
Well, and he, you know, he did go through some dry spells and some struggles at the NHL level before his, you know, ultimate season-ending injury. So, but I guess I would just say I expect him to be on the roster next October. I'll just put it that way. Yep.
Yeah. And you hope that he does exactly the same thing that he did last offseason or last preseason. And you're comfortable and confident putting him in there because he's proven that he's here and he's ready to go. And hopefully with the time to heal and hopefully get stronger, maybe he looks even better than last year. So that's up to him to prove. And if he does, then I don't think we're talking about him being in Providence. So if you're a Poitras fan, Kim, I don't think you have to worry too much. I'm not particularly sitting here thinking, oh, he's got to start in Providence. I think he more than likely begins in Boston, and if all goes well, should stick around in Boston. So where should we go next here? Because we have a lot of questions we didn't get to.
Well, Sam asked about where they skate in the summer. We answered that. She also mentioned Will Smith signing in San Jose. So that gives Scott's BU Terriers a bit of an advantage next year, although Macklin Celebrini will probably be going to San Jose too. Something tells you that was a part of Will Smith's decision making to go to San Jose.
Yeah.
So
they'll get the clock started on, you know, finally, I think gives San Jose fans like some hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, because that organization's been a mess for many years now. But getting Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini in, like, that's certainly an exciting place to start.
Yeah. I was not sold on the fact that last year's BC's freshman line was going to stick together. I know people wanted them to try to run it back, and they would have had a decent chance to make another long run. But to me, it seemed like Will was playing at the level where he could easily just transition to the NHL after his freshman season. So he's not going to, I don't think he's going to regret deciding to sign with San Jose after one season. Some people like to, you know, enjoy the college experience a little bit longer, but no, him and Celebrini probably go have a lot of fun out there. And that kind of ties back into the Trevor Zegras thing. Like, if Gauthier and Zegras were on the same team and they were, you know, both there, like these younger guys that have all this talent, but it just doesn't sound like that's going to be the case in Anaheim. So, whereas Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini should be okay, should be good to go.
And by the way, one tie into the Bruins here that I'm at least curious about, but you know, San Jose's number one center right now before the two young kids come in is Logan Couture, who I don't think is going to be traded this summer because he's coming off an injury, and he just has to get back on the ice and play games. But certainly, I think is going to be someone to monitor next season. Like, I could see a situation where he's around to be their captain and kind of help those young guys acclimate to NHL life early on, and then assuming he is able to get healthy and play fairly well, probably gets traded at some point during the season, because he's up there in years now too, and like I don't think he's really going to want to stick around for the whole rebuild. But again, just, you know, another center option to throw out there. I especially coming off injury. I don't know how much Couture has left in the tank, but
yeah,
a name to watch.
Let's jump down to one of Annie's questions before we get to some of the YouTube comments. What do you guys think of the futures for Merkulov and Fabian Lysell? I mean, I think Merkulov, I don't think he got an extended look last year that he had hoped for, maybe other fans had hoped for. Does that opportunity come again? To Scott's point, he's going to have to earn it in camp. It's going to be it's an uphill battle, I think, for him. As it pertains to just the Bruins middle six. It's Merkulov isn't going to be a top center. He's probably not going to be a second line center, and those are the areas where the Bruins are kind of looking to add as the top six, not so much the middle six or the bottom six. And Fabian Lysell, he's definitely been a patient project for the Bruins. He's had Jekyll and Hyde development, and that's fine. But he's also had unfortunate injury issues that have set him back as well. So Fabian Lysell he's a mystery. I don't know if the Bruins necessarily know what they have in him, and I don't know if because of that the rest of the league knows what they have in him as a potential prospect to acquire. I think Fabian Lysell certainly has a lot to earn this training camp, and I think Merkulov just might be a casualty to the numbers game.
Yeah, especially if all this focus and this extra cap space goes to signing another center up the depth chart that pushes everybody a step back in the depth chart. So that definitely would not help him.
It almost feels to me like Merkulov might have to beat out Poitras. Like it might have to be a situation where, hey, maybe Poitras, maybe it turns out he does need to work on some stuff, and sometimes Providence could do him well, and Merkulov's right there ready to pounce and show like, hey guys, I already learned everything you need me to learn. Like I've been in your system for 2 years now. Because other than that, it's like, is there really room for two young centers like that? Like it doesn't really seem like it. Like maybe one of them bumps over to wing. Lysell, yeah, look, Bruins would love for him to be a middle six contributor next year, but I think again, like you got to put yourself in a situation where he needs to win that job. He needs to beat someone out. I don't think you can bank on that because, like you said, like he's had some inconsistency in his development. He's had some injuries. By all accounts, everyone knows the comments Mujanel made about him around midseason, saying he needs to buy in and be committed to an all-around game. By all accounts, he was down a stretch. He was playing a better, well-rounded game, and then still, again, suffered an upper body injury. But yeah, like that's also kind of interesting. Like if they do go and trade for Martin Necas or someone like that who again, you would love for Necas to be a center, but like potentially he just ends up slotting in as the number 2 right wing behind Pastrnak. And it's like, well, that would probably be the spot you'd pencil in Lysell to take in, a year or two. And what would it kind of say about what they think of him if they're bringing in someone else who might just be locked into that spot for 5, 6, 7 years?
Yeah, and that's kind of a gamble. Kind of a gamble you have to take because you've not seen Lysell at the NHL level yet. So,
what do you guys think of Sean Monahan? Ben asked us about Sean Monahan. I think as a 1C, no. I mean, as a 1C, no. I'll just say that. He compares he says he could be had for half the money of Lindholm, put up similar numbers. I mean, I don't think at this stage in his career he's a number 1 center. Again, there's a lot of guys that can fit on a deep championship roster, but if we're talking in that spot, I don't think so.
I will say in the past, like he's had some issues as of late, but he's had some really good seasons. It's not been in a few years because he's dealt with a lot. He hasn't played a full season in any of his the last 3
This past season he was really good. That's got to be one of
this
his
past season he was good. I was kind of talking about the end of his time with Calgary and then coming to Montreal. But last season, yes, like this last season, I think he did okay with Montreal and the Jets. But I like him as a player. I like that this name was brought up because there's definitely a conversation to be had about what you think about him. And when he's playing at his best, he's very effective. He can be pretty fast. He makes these really smart, sophisticated looking plays sometimes that they're just pretty. So yeah, I think that's an interesting name to bring up.
Yeah, for a long time I actually really wasn't a fan of his game, and the way he fell off in Calgary to the point where it wasn't just that he was overpaid, it was he was borderline unplayable. He was so bad. He rehabbed his career in Montreal for sure, and then I thought when the Canadiens traded him, I was terrific job by them. They just sold high. I don't think he's going to be a difference maker in Winnipeg. But then he had 24 points in 34 games there. 13 goals. He was still really solid in Winnipeg. So the analytics say, he had a good season and wasn't blocked or anything like that. So I can't deny that. I'm still not the biggest fan of him overall. Like anyone, it comes down to price. Do I think he can make you a better team? Sure, but to Brian's point, definitely not as a number one center.
Well, and he doesn't really address the need for speed that the Bruins management and brass talked about their press conference availability after the season. So he's a slow moving big body centerman that is on the back half of his career.
At one point in his career he had good bursts of speed, and I just don't really know how much of that's left. So
did Tyler Seguin. He looked like the fastest player on earth when he was in Boston. Now he's on a Dallas team where he's he looks like he's an average skater. So the game passes some of these guys by as they get older. Daniel had a comment. I think this was in reference to our last episode when we talked about how unlike the Harry Sinden days, the Jacobs family ownership does spend to the cap. So it's not as if management doesn't have the support of ownership to make the team as best as they can be. To that, Daniel said, keep in mind that just because the team spends to the cap doesn't mean they spend to the max in other areas. Teams seem fixated on American-born NCAA players followed by a fair amount of Swedes. They don't seem to have as big a scouting staff as other organizations, and I don't get the sense, based on their drafts, that they cast a wide enough net. Perennial cup teams in the cap era are built from the ground up. Tampa, Pittsburgh, Chicago, LA. Retooling teams don't have the chemistry to go 4 rounds, no matter how good they are on paper. The last time the Bees won a cup was off of a rebuild. So, 2-part question, guys. A, do you agree that while the Jacobs spent to the cap, that they could spend better in other areas? And B, do you feel as though that a cup winner has to be a team that comes from a rebuild, essentially, rather than a retool?
I don't really agree with either. So I looked up scouting stat. I didn't go through the whole league, but just a few. So the Bruins officially have 19 people listed under their scouting staff. So that includes regional directors, pro scouts, amateur, Europeans, the whole thing. The Dallas Stars are generally held up as the model of drafting for, I'm going to say, the last 5 to 7 years. They have 14 people listed on their scouting staff. I think we all agree the Tampa Bay Lightning have done some good scouting and drafting and finding value without having a ton of high picks. They have 15 people on their scouting staff. So to me, it's not that they don't have enough scouts. They actually have, it seems to me, more than the average NHL team. I think they've had some blind spots or some areas where they haven't been comfortable drafting from. That they don't draft Russian players. That's a market they just have not been involved in. You know, there were a couple years there where they didn't draft anyone out of major juniors, but that has changed now in recent years. Like, obviously, Poitras was a major junior pick, so
Yep.
I think sometimes they just look for NCAA players or, you know, Swedish players, which obviously there's the PJ Axelsson connection there because he is their European scouting director, is from Sweden, is based out of Sweden.
Yep.
Like, so I get it. Obviously, they have places they're more comfortable drafting from than others, but I don't think they're really ignoring anywhere other than possibly Russia. Like, I am curious why they just stay away. There's reasons to stay away from Russia. Like, there's political reasons. There's guys there who end up never coming to North America. Like, it is it's a market that presents unique challenges. But that's really the only place I would say like they've kind of truly stayed away from.
Yeah. And PJ Axelsson, we saw, I'm sure you guys saw the Behind the Bees from last offseason where he's talking to Fabian Lysell and kind of teaching him the history of the Bruins and different things and working with Lysell, who's Swedish. And I personally see Don Sweeney and Adam McQuaid and actually there's a few other staff members I recognize from the Bruins that travel to both the Providence Bruins, obviously, to check on their prospects there and other AHLers. And then they're a lot of the times they're at Hockey East ranks or, you know, in the area looking at some of the guys playing locally, because I mean, that's easy for someone like Don Sweeney, who doesn't necessarily have time to go fly around Europe and like during a regular season, but he can drive down to Providence where I saw him because he's got a few prospects that are playing for the Friars and like, or go to a game at BU or BC because that's easier. But there's obviously going to be some extra information that you're able to glean from guys that are playing in this area in college or otherwise. So that makes it easier. So yes, there's, you can't deny that there's a bias towards college hockey players, but in my experience broadcasting college hockey over the last 10 years, that's because college hockey is also attracting the best talent. So like, you're lucky that it's coming to your doorstep from other countries now, where it hadn't in the past. It mostly just been the best American players, some of the best Canadian players, but now college hockey attracts this whole wide range of players from different countries. So that's why you see a lot of people coming out of the NCAA, even though you know, they might be from different places in Europe and what have you.
As to the second part about a team that retools not being able to have the chemistry of a rebuilding team, you know, look, I think if you look at the 4 teams remaining, one of them is going to win the Stanley Cup, and I don't really think any one of those teams are there because of a specific rebuild we can talk about. I mean, if you look at Florida, I mean, Aaron Ekblad was a first overall pick. What was that, a decade ago? And he's not even their top defenseman, I would say right now. He could arguably be their 3rd best defenseman. You know, Florida's DNA changed with the hockey trade when you brought over Matthew Tkachuk. You bring over Sam Reinhart, who was not a Panthers draft pick, or Carter Verhaeghe, who was not a Panthers draft pick, and Montour was in Anaheim. So, I mean, Florida, Tarasenko was brought in. Like Florida's not an example of a team that like it was a core that came up together. I mean, Dallas, Ben's been there forever. Sagan was traded there. Robertson was not a, you know, top pick. Wyatt Johnston was like, you know, again, like these weren't lottery picks is what I'm trying to say. New York, Artemi Panarin's leading the way for them. Adam Fox was drafted by, was it Calgary? So, and then who's the 4th team I'm missing? Edmonton. I mean, okay, so Edmonton, you have McDavid, but Edmonton's been rebuilding since 1910. So, I mean, it's not really a like a foolproof plan, and even they have their issues in goal and have forever.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's
Vegas,
not as easy as just rebuilding.
Vegas winning the cup was built entirely externally. Like they didn't have a team a decade ago to build through the draft. So, you know, that like obviously that's unique, but even even like after the expansion draft, they went out and acquired a lot of their key players. Like they needed a number one center, so they traded for Jack Eichel. They needed a number one defenseman, so they got Alex Pietrangelo. So like those big moves. Again, like we've talked about it with at center, it's hard, but like if you're willing to give up the pieces, eventually you're going to be able to find something. So there's different ways to do it. Like yes,
Right.
Ideally you're doing it through the draft, you're doing it internally, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like and again, it's not going to be that way for you. So like unless you want to tear it all down, like you're not getting top 5 picks. That's where you find franchise cornerstones. So you're not gonna have those picks. So it's not, you got to do it another way.
Yeah, like yes, those Blackhawks teams had Kane and Taves. Pittsburgh had Crosby and Malkin. The Kings had Doughty and Kopitar and others. The Avalanche had McKinnon. Tampa Bay had Stamkos, Hedman. So like, this is not to invalidate the teams that were mentioned in this question, but to Scott's point, it can be done outside of a classic rebuild, and it has been done outside of a classic rebuild. And so like, yeah, the Bruins won the Cup in 11. Yeah, it was a rebuild. They also had some pretty important free agent signings that came to Boston that were a backbone of that. And
yeah, I think some guy named Zdeno Chara
was a second overall
free
pick.
agent.
Yeah,
Tyler Seguin was a draft lottery pick through the Phil Kessel trade, but he wasn't. Yes, he had his moments, but he wasn't like the key guy in that playoff run. So it can be done in many ways. There's no one right way to do it.
Would have been interesting if Tyler Seguin had been able to stay in Boston. What things would have looked like. Just a thought. But we don't have a whole lot of time left, guys. Is there any other question that you see? And we will try to get to some of these next episode too, because I think we only got through half, to be honest with you. Is there anything in particular that jumps out at you guys that you're itching to talk about before we sign off?
So just a quick hit here. CJ asked us on Twitter, can you explain how rookie camp and development camp are different? And then he said, I assume Lohrei, Poitras, Beecher will just be a training camp. Yeah, so development camp that comes first. So that, as I mentioned earlier, is July 1st through 4th. And that is really just, so that's going to be like all younger prospects. So not just guys who are in Providence. In fact, guys who are in Providence probably aren't going to be there. But college guys, major juniors, the guys you just drafted will all be there. And it's really just a chance to kind of get everyone on the same page. And it's more skill work. It's about off ice training and nutritional stuff. So it's more kind of a, hey, we're going to set up your plan for the summer type thing. Rookie camp is the week before training camp. And that is a lot more of like, show us what you've got. Show us you either are ready to compete for a spot in Boston or deserve a spot in Providence. That is like actual build up towards training camp, towards making a team. Like that's more intense. Like development is also part of it, but that's more of a like, show us how much you've improved since last season.
Yeah.
Thing. Whereas development camp is, here's the things we want you to improve heading into next season.
Yes. And rookie camp covering rookie camp in the past, it's like you're getting these guys from college in, and you're trying to see like with your own two eyes in front of you, like how, what their skill sets are during certain drills and have your own coaches like spend specific time on it to see whether or not you're looking for them to play more time in college or hopefully, come up sooner or what have you. So the very first one I covered was actually McAvoy's first rookie camp. It was McAvoy, Carlo, Frederick, Donato, Bjork, that's who those were some of the main people from the first one I did. That feels like a long time ago now, but they're trying to see which of those guys were ready to come to play professionally. So.
All right. So I would say before we sign off, if we didn't get to your questions today, like Bridget alluded to a few minutes ago, we will get to it the next time we record. So thank you all for submitting your questions. We appreciate it. Bridget, Scott, any final thoughts before we go?
Had to do it
No?
once.
You guys are good?
No.
Did I freeze?
We don't. Yeah, you just missed my popcorn face. We don't need any more of that. So.
All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.